You've been seduced by beauty so many times that you don't even realize you're the one being hunted. Every time you chase what captivates you, you surrender the very power that could make you truly attractive. Nietzsche understood this madness better than anyone, and what he discovered about the psychology of seduction will shatter everything you thought you knew about desire and control. There's something devastating about watching a strong man crumble the moment he sees a beautiful woman smile. You've witnessed it countless times, maybe even felt it yourself. That instant collapse of boundaries, that sudden willingness to abandon everything you stand for just to be noticed by someone whose beauty feels like a drug you can't resist. But here's what most men never realize. That moment of surrender isn't love. It's not even attraction, it's psychological warfare. And you're losing a battle you don't even know you're fighting. Nietzsche called it the eternal feminine. Not as some romantic ideal, but as the most sophisticated form of power disguised as vulnerability. He saw through the theater, recognized that what we call feminine beauty is actually nature's most elegant trap, designed to make men voluntarily surrender their autonomy while believing they're the ones in pursuit.
You think you're chasing her?
But she's been pulling your strings since the moment you noticed her existence. This isn't about hatred or resentment toward women. This is about understanding the game that's been played on your psychology since you first felt attraction. Carl Jung warned us about projection, about how we fall in love not with the person, but with our own unconscious feminine essence reflected back at us. You're not attracted to her. You're hypnotized by the missing piece of your own soul that she seems to carry. In that hypnosis, you become weak, desperate, controllable. The beautiful woman doesn't need to manipulate you directly. Your own mind does all the work for her. You start editing yourself, performing a version of masculinity you think she wants to see, abandoning the very qualities that made you interesting in the first place. You become useful instead of powerful, available instead of valuable, predictable instead of mysterious. And the moment she senses that shift, the moment she realizes she can control your emotional state with a glance or a word, something inside her loses interest in you completely. This is what Nietzsche exposed in his philosophy, the seductive madness that turns hunters into prey, kings into servants, men into emotional children begging for maternal approval, disguised as romantic love. The tragedy isn't that beautiful women have this power. The tragedy is that most men never recognize when they're being conquered by their own projections. But what if you could see through the illusion? What if you could maintain your center even in the presence of devastating beauty? What if you could appreciate feminine power without becoming enslaved by it? The answers lie in understanding the psychology of attraction, not as some mystical force, but as a biological and psychological system that can be decoded, understood, and navigated with consciousness instead of compulsion. You've felt it before? The moment her laughter cuts through the air like a spell, and you find yourself standing still, though every fiber of your strength is being siphoned away by something you both crave and fear. In that breathless instant, the hunger inside, your ambition, your certainty, your sense of self, curdles into a desperate need to be noticed, approved, possessed. Nietzsche called it the eternal feminine, not as a celebration of women, but as a revelation that beauty itself can act as the most sophisticated form of power, ensnaring a man's will before he even realizes he's been targeted. You think you're choosing her? In reality, you've already been chosen by your own projection, your psyche mapping unspoken desires onto an image she can embody. What feels like attraction is really a silent surrender. Your instinct to seize power is anesthetized by the lure of her presence. Every glance she offers becomes a currency in a psychological transaction you can't see. And each smile you chase chips away at the inner fortress you built to protect your autonomy. You begin customizing your behavior to fit her expectations, your words, suppressing your anger, embracing platitudes that feel hollow, believing that you're earning her admiration. When in truth, you're trading away the very qualities that set you apart. Your unpredictability, your fierce self-possession, your refusal to play along with society's scripts. Behind this veil lies a truth Nietzsche exposed in his aphorisms, that the strongest chains are those we forge ourselves out of longing. In the hunt for approval, you become like a predator ensnared in its own trap, convinced that the best way to assert your power is to surrender it. And that is the cruelest irony. True dominance over your life dissolves the moment you mistake the performance of need for the expression of desire. Carl Jung warned us about projection, falling in love not with another person, but with the unacknowledged shadow self we see in their reflection. That shadow demands acknowledgement, and until you grant it space, you remain a puppet in a drama authored by your unconscious fears. But this paralysis of will is not irreversible. Recognizing the seduction for what it is, a dance between your shadow and your ego, allows you to reclaim agency. You can still appreciate beauty without bowing to its altar. You can greet her smile without handing over the keys to your kingdom. The power you feared losing lies dormant in your capacity for self-awareness, waiting for the moment you refuse to edit yourself for external validation. When you witness the mechanics of your own hypnosis, you break the spell. If this insight resonates, consider taking the next step. Subscribing to the channel helps. Continue to uncover these hidden patterns together. You step into a room and immediately sense the performance, the subtle tilt of her head, delicate cadence of her voice, the practiced vulnerability that calls you forward, as if you owe her your protection. This is the theater of innocence, an evolutionary masterpiece that Nietzsche would have recognized as a form of strategic weakness, masquerading as purity. In your mind, you're drawn to defend, to rescue, to prove your worth through allegiance. But what you don't see is that every gesture of apparent fragility is a calculated cue. It's designed to trigger your most primal instincts and lure you into a debt you cannot repay. In truth, this strategy is older than civilization itself. Long before marriage contracts or social norms, human attraction evolved to ensure cooperation and survival. Displaying vulnerability signals need provokes response. When a woman performs innocence, she taps into the neural circuits, wired for caregiving and dominance maintenance. You feel compelled to step up, to cast aside doubt, and to prove your strength. Yet each time you do, you give her more authority over your emotional state. Trading autonomy for the illusion of intimacy, Nietzsche dissected this dynamic by exposing the moral undercurrents beneath the appearance of virtue. He saw that society's exaltation of feminine purity was less about celebrating innocence and more about endorsing a technique for social control. By elevating the meek and the modest, civilization taught men to revere and protect them, binding masculine energy to the preservation of an ideal. This ideal, however, becomes a leash. The more you chase it, the tighter it binds you to the expectations of your own biology and culture. When Carl Jung introduced the archetype of the anima, he identified the image of the innocent woman as one of the most potent projections of the male psyche. You aren't attracted to her individuality. You're enthralled by the echo of your own lost innocence, the memory of a completeness you once possessed as a child. That nostalgia overrides critical judgment, and you find yourself playing the role of the savior. Convinced that your valor will finally earn you the connection you crave, instead, you reinforce the cycle. She gains influence, and you become enthralled. Breaking free from this performance requires more than awareness. It demands a recalibration of value. Real strength is not the aggressive display of dominance, but the refusal to be enslaved by another's act. You must learn to recognize the cues for what they are, invitations to play a part in a drama that serves someone else's narrative. By refusing to step on stage, you protect your center from the gravity of collective delusion. You relinquish the urge to rescue in favor of observing, to respond with curiosity rather than compliance. Practical insight emerges when you test the boundary. Offer kindness without expectation, respect without submission. Notice the moment your instinct to rescue flares and choose self-regulation instead. This subtle refusal to be manipulated reveals a new kind of power, one that Nietzsche would have admired as the will to freedom beyond social scripts. When you maintain this posture, you transform from a pawn in her performance into the author of your own story. Reclaiming the autonomy surrendered in pursuit of a phantom ideal. In this revelation, the theater of innocence loses its enchantment. You see the mechanism, not the myth, and the veil falls away. The world remains full of vulnerability and need, but you are no longer compelled to equate those signals with your own loss of control. You engage with authenticity, not artifice. And in that space, You find a grounded form of connection that no performance can replicate. When a man falls into the trap of infatuation, he is not merely captivated by a face or a voice. He becomes the vessel for something deeper, an unconscious possession, orchestrated by the archetype Carl Jung called the anima. You may have felt this yourself. A suffocating need to mirror her every mood, an uncontrollable urge to anticipate her thoughts, and the sudden collapse of your own desires into a single fixation. In that moment, your psyche ceases to be your own, as though an invisible hand has rewritten your emotional script to serve someone else's narrative. It feels like love, but it is more akin to an emotional seizure, a hijacking of your will that leaves you disoriented and powerless. Jung described the anima as the unconscious feminine image that resides within every man, a keeper of his creativity and vitality, but also a potential usurper of his autonomy when projected onto another person. You aren't truly interacting with the woman in front of you. You're dancing with a projection, a myth conjured by your own shadow. Every gesture of hers becomes a signal to your anima, a command to relinquish your center and merge with her reflected essence. When this possession occurs, your thoughts spin in endless loops of doubt and desire. Your confidence evaporates. You find yourself performing behaviors that feel foreign, breaking routines, altering beliefs, chasing impossible ideals. In the service of an image in your mind rather than a real human being, this dynamic mirrors Nietzsche's critique of reactive forces, where the will to power is subverted by an insidious force masquerading as need.
Ow.
Instead of asserting your own creativity and ambition, you become the agent of your own repression, submitting to a phantom authority that demands your energy and attention. The more you feed this projection, idealizing her words, rationalizing her actions, excusing her silences, the deeper you sink into a psychological quicksand from which it becomes increasingly difficult to escape. Scientific evidence underscores this ancient pattern. A 2023 study from UCLA's Social Neuroscience laboratory found that individuals experiencing intense romantic infatuation show activation, not only in reward centers, but also in brain regions associated with anxiety and compulsion, indicating that the state of being in love can mirror certain forms of obsessive disorder. The researchers noted that the very neural circuits designed to enhance bonding and cooperation can be exploited by our own projections, creating a loop of dependency that feels impossible to break. In essence, your brain is wired to protect connections, but your unconscious harnesses that wiring to hold you captive. Breaking the possession of the anima begins with a radical act of awareness, recognizing that the person you believe you love is entangled with your own shadow. You must distinguish between her authentic self and the phantom you've assigned to her. This requires stepping back from the immediacy of emotional response and observing your own reactions with ruthless honesty. When you notice the surge of anxiety at a missed text or the spike of elation at a compliment, pause and ask yourself, am I responding to her or to the story I've woven about her? Once recognized, you can begin the work of individuation that Jung championed, reclaiming the enmeshed parts of your psyche that you surrendered to the projection. This involves integrating your anima, acknowledging the qualities she represents: intuition, sensitivity, creativity as your own potential, rather than as attributes you lack and must seek externally. By cultivating these traits within yourself, you no longer need to outsource them to another person. Your creativity remains yours. Your emotional depth remains balanced by reason. Your identity stands firm even in the face of profound attraction. To put this into practice, set boundaries that honor your autonomy. Allow yourself to enjoy the relationship without losing your routines. Maintain your morning rituals. Protect your solitude and guard your capacity for independent thought. When you feel the pull of obsession, remind yourself that the woman in front of you is not the embodiment of your anima, but a distinct individual with her own complexity. Practice gratitude for genuine moments of connection, but refuse to let those moments dictate your self-worth. In doing so, you transform the possession into a partnership. The anima no longer haunts your unconscious. She becomes a guide to unexplored facets of your own psyche, enriching your life rather than confining it. You emerge not as a wounded lover, pleading for affection, but as a sovereign individual, capable of deep connection without self-erasure. This is the crucible in which true power is forged, a power born not of domination, but of conscious integration. A power that Nietzsche would recognize as the ultimate expression of free will. You felt the sting of uncertainty the moment. Her interest wavers, her laughter no longer pulls you forward, but leaves you empty, as though she's withheld a vital truth. This shift is no accident. It's the hidden economy of desire at work. You are drawn to what seems scarce. Ambivalence becomes an intoxicating cue, uncertainty a magnet for your most primal drives. Studies from the University of California have shown that ambiguity triggers dopamine spikes akin to those experienced in gambling, confirming that the less available someone appears, the more your brain compels you to pursue them. Ambiguity weaponizes attraction, transforming genuine connection into a high-stakes hunt where the reward remains just out of reach. Nietzsche, observing society's moral codes, recognized how scarcity breeds value. He wrote that we prize what we fear we cannot have, and by elevating the unattainable, civilization ensures our relentless pursuit. In the theater of seduction, the performance of disinterest is a strategic masterpiece. She offers glimpses of vulnerability only to retract them, stilling a cycle of hope and disappointment that binds your attention and energy. Each glance of her eyes becomes currency, and you, eager to invest, pour your will into pleasing an ideal rather than a real person. This dynamic mirrors the operations of a market. Supply and demand dictate perceived worth. When her attention is rationed, demand surges, and you, like any rational actor, escalate your bids, doing more, saying more, offering more of yourself. Unaware, you abandon the qualities that once made you unique, adopting behaviors calibrated to elicit approval rather than expressing authentic desire. In economics, this phenomenon creates bubbles. The more you inflate expectations, the greater the eventual collapse when reality fails to meet the hype. But this bubble of desire is even more insidious because it preys on your unconscious. Carl Jung described how projection fuels romantic obsession. You project your anima onto her, attributing scarcity not to her genuine self, but to a mythic figure you've constructed. Each retreat of her interest feels like a threat to your identity, prompting frantic efforts to reclaim her attention. Your self-esteem becomes hostage to her performance, and every act of ambivalence deepens your entanglement in this invisible market. To break free, you must recognize the transaction for what it is, a dance of power disguised as romance. Begin by observing your responses to her ambiguity without acting on them immediately. Notice the physiological rush, the surge of longing, and the discomfort you feel in the waiting. Label it as what it is, a call to surrender your autonomy in exchange for a mirage. This clarity severs the illusion that scarcity equals value. Next, recalibrate your internal value system. Reinforce behaviors that honor your own needs rather than catering to imagined ones. Practice saying no to excessive outreach or over-analysis of her signals. Instead, invest in your own pursuits, your work, your passions, your friendships, so that your worth is defined by your reality, not her performances. As Nietzsche would argue, the true measure of your power lies in the ability to affirm life on your own terms, unswayed by external whims. In reclaiming your autonomy, you transform the hidden economy of desire into an equal partnership. You engage with her presence without turning it into a wager on your self-worth. The ambiguity that once enslaved you becomes a shared mystery to explore, not a lever of control. When you demand nothing and risk everything authenticity over, artifice, you step out of the market and into genuine connection. In the end, power is not about erasing mystery, but about choosing where to direct your will. The desire that once held you captive becomes a testament to your freedom. If this revelation resonates, leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue exposing the hidden mechanics of power and attraction. You feel it the moment you realize you're performing for her. Every joke carefully calibrated to make her smile, every story tweaked to align with her values, every silence cushioned with tentative humor, This is the echo chamber of submission, where your authentic voice drowns beneath an endless loop of self-censorship. Nietzsche referred to this as the moral of the herd. The pressure to conform to external expectations so powerful that even your deepest convictions bend like reeds in the wind. In striving to please her, you've become your own jailer, locked in a persona designed to be palatable rather than potent. Consider Jung's concept of the persona, the mask we present to the world to secure acceptance. Persona often crystallizes around the desires and demands of the other. You adopt roles: protector, philosopher, comedian, confidant, shifting fluidly from one to the next, as though your true self is an afterthought. This malleability feels like adaptability, but it's actually a slow erosion. With each concession to her unspoken expectations, you hand over fragments of your identity. Over time, the question, "Who are you?" becomes impossible to answer, because the reflection you see in the mirror is a mosaic of her projected needs rather than your own. Scientific research confirms the dangers of this chameleon effect. A 2022 study at Stanford University found that individuals who adapt their behavior excessively to please a partner exhibit increased rates of anxiety and depression, marking a clear link between over-accommodation and psychological distress. The brain's reward circuitry initially responds positively to her approval. Approval floods your system when she compliments your tailored persona. But soon the same circuitry becomes sensitized to rejection cues, heightening your fear of disapproval and driving further conformity. You become trapped in a feedback loop. The more you modify yourself to earn her approval, the more anxious you become about maintaining it. Nietzsche would argue that this cycle is the ultimate betrayal of the will to power. Instead of channeling your life energy into creative self-expression, you hand it over in tit-for-tat exchanges of validation. Your power dissolves not through overt domination, but through the subtler mechanics of emotional extortion. A furrowed brow or curt response from her triggers a surge of self-doubt so intense that you'll scramble to recapture her favor, sacrificing autonomy for a fleeting sense of belonging. Breaking free from this mirror requires confronting two brutal truths. First, that her approval has become your lodestar. And second, that no performance, no matter how flawless, can satisfy the hunger you've stoked within yourself. True liberation emerges when you reject the contract that binds your worth to her reaction. You must reclaim the shards of identity you relinquished by rediscovering the values, passions, and convictions that once propelled you forward independently of any audience. Practically, begin by scheduling deliberate disconnects, moments when you withhold performance and simply exist. Silence your inner editor and allow your unfiltered thoughts to surface, even if they seem trivial or raw. Journal the beliefs and desires you sense stirring beneath the tailored persona, your real priorities, curiosities, and moral boundaries. Share one of these truths with her unvarnished, accepting that it may not align with her expectations. If it triggers discomfort, that is evidence of the grip she holds on your self-concept. If it is met with genuine curiosity, it confirms that. Authenticity fosters deeper connection than artifice ever could. Simultaneously, cultivate practices that nourish your inherent worth. Re-engage with creative outlets, writing, painting, fitness, coding, any pursuit that generates intrinsic satisfaction, rather than external praise. Let your self-esteem be built on achievements you define, not applause you solicit. Nietzsche championed the idea of amor fati, loving one's fate, including one's flassande. In this spirit, embrace the imperfect person you are. It's not the curated version designed to please. As you stabilize in self-awareness, you'll notice a shift. Instead of bending toward her whims, you stand rooted in your principles. Her reactions become data, not verdicts. Invitations to dialogue, not dictates to obey. You will see her as a fellow traveler rather than a demanding judge. Your relationship will transform from performance art into a genuine exchange between sovereign individuals. In reclaiming your voice, you recover the power you once surrendered. The persona that entertained her fades, and the authentic self you feared exposing emerges, sculpted by your convictions rather than her expectations. That is the mirror shattered not in violence, but in the quiet confidence of self-possession. In its fragments, You discern your own reflection for the first time in the silent void that follows obsession. There lies a hidden door to freedom and invitation to revolt against the emotional scripts you've internalized. True liberation does not emerge from grand gestures or miraculous escapes. It arises in small acts of refusal, in the steadfast choice to honor your own rhythms instead of being hijacked by another's desires. Nietzsche called this the affirmation of life, the will to embrace your reality, including its fractures, and to declare your own terms of existence. When you stop chasing approval and instead begin to carve out space for your authentic needs, you ignite a shift so subtle that it often goes unnoticed until the old patterns no longer hold power over you. Imagine your life as a symphony, once distorted by dissonant notes borrowed from someone else's composition. In relinquishing the melody she demands, you recover the tune that resonates with your soul. This process starts by listening inwardly to the quiet urgings you've long suppressed, the call to preserve your solitude, to pursue creativity without justification, to speak your truth even if it jars the harmony around you. Each time you prioritize these urgings, you reclaim a fragment of autonomy that the seduction of approval once devoured. Carl Jung described this reclamation as the integration of the shadow, the recognition and acceptance of the parts of yourself you relegated to darkness. When you cease to project those disowned traits onto another, you no longer need to seek them externally. Your sensitivity, once a vulnerability used against you, becomes a source of wisdom. Your impulsive desires transform into raw energy. You can direct with intention. Your capacity for solitude matures into resilience rather than loneliness. In integrating your shadow, you forge an internal compass, impervious to the temptations of external validation. Practically, this demands creating daily rituals that reinforce your sovereignty. Begin with a commitment to a solitary practice. Morning walk without your phone. It's a journaling session where you challenge each thought that seeks approval. A time set aside to explore a passion purely for its own sake. These rituals act like muscle training for your will. The more you honor them, the stronger your inner voice becomes, and the less susceptible you are to external demands disguised as intimacy. Simultaneously, establish boundaries in your relationships. Recognize the moments when you feel compelled to censor yourself to maintain harmony or elicit praise. Instead of complying, pause and choose one unfiltered response, an honest opinion, a respectfully firm refusal, or simply silence. Notice how these moments stir discomfort in both you and the other person. This discomfort signals that you are disrupting the transactional dynamic. Over time, that disruption clarifies who you are apart from the roles you once played. As your autonomy expands, watch how your interactions evolve. You no longer operate as a performer anticipating applause, but as a collaborator offering genuine exchange. Conversations deepen not because you share more flattering versions of yourself, but because you share your real thoughts and feelings. Attraction shifts from a fleeting concoction of scarcity and projection to a resonant meeting of sovereign beings, each drawn to the other's presence without sacrificing selfhood. This newfound freedom echoes Nietzsche's ideal of the Bermenschenot, a superhuman, but an individual who masters the art of self-creation. You become the architect of your own identity, sculpting a life guided by internal imperatives rather than external scripts. In this state, the seduction that once ensnared you loses its potency. You appreciate beauty without succumbing to it, engage in relationships without surrendering your will, and navigate desire as a conscious choice rather than an automatic reflex. True power, then, is not the ability to dominate others, but the capacity to remain undominated by them. It is the will to be both vulnerable and invulnerable, to open your heart without offering it as currency. In this equilibrium, you discover that your truest connection with another arises not from performance, but from the fearless revelation of your unedited self. You stand at the edge of a precipice, staring down into the chasm of patterns that have dictated your emotional life far longer than you can remember. Below, the winds of seduction and approval swirl, carrying the echoes of every moment you sacrificed autonomy for acceptance. Yet here, in this moment of stillness, you glimpse a path upward, one lit by the unblinking flame of lucidity. Liberation. Through lucidity, is not a dramatic escape, but a slow awakening, a refusal to drift any further in the currents of unconscious scripts. Nietzsche called for a revaluation of all values, an overturning of inherited judgments to uncover truths, forged by one's own will. In the same spirit, lucidity demands you overturn the hidden values that have granted power to external demands over your inner life. Begin by naming the unspoken contracts you've signed, agreements to perform, comply, evade conflict, and placate, needs that were never yours to satisfy. These contracts have shackled you more tightly than any overt manipulation because you, not another, drafted their terms. Your first act of lucidity is to read the fine print of these contracts, the script that tells you how to speak, whom to please, what emotions you're allowed to show. Once you identify the clauses, you can challenge them. Ask yourself, who benefits from my compliance? What would happen if I refused this clause and rewrote it in my own voice? This interrogation illuminates the shadowy corners of your psyche. Where compliance thrived unchallenged, Carl Jung described lucidity as the confrontation with the unconscious bringing into the light those hidden motives that steer your choices. When you notice the impulse to craft your words for her approval or adjust your actions to prevent her discomfort, pause and observe without judgment. This moment of observation is lucidity incarnate. You are no longer a puppet in a drama authored by old fears, but a conscious agent witnessing the strings. The clarity gained here severs the automatic feedback loops of anxiety and compulsion, rendering the mechanism powerless even before you dismantle it. With lucidity established, cultivate the practice of radical self-honesty. Speak a truth you would normally suppress even if it casts you as flawed or unfriendly. Feel the tension that arises when your words deviate from the expected script. That tension marks the frontier of your regained agency. Stand firm in that tension. Let it enfold you like a rite of passage. Each time you choose honesty over harmony, you reclaim territory within yourself that has been ceded to external scripts. Over time, the tension subsides, what once felt dangerous becomes familiar, and you learn that honesty need not annihilate connection, but can deepen it, parallel to verbal honesty. Practice emotional lucidity by mapping your affective landscape. Without self-censorship, when jealousy flares, label it without shame. I am jealous. When boredom seeps in, admit it. I am bored. You create a ledger of emotions that belong to you alone, immune to interpretation or judgment. This ledger becomes a compass, guiding you toward experiences that resonate with your genuine needs rather than those you think you ought to have. Nietzsche argued that one should become the hero in one's own story. Emotional lucidity transforms you from a bystander in your emotional narrative into the protagonist. Authoring each scene with intention, as you reinforce lucidity, you will notice a shift in your interactions. No longer do you react reflexively to her moods. Instead, you respond from a grounded place of self-knowledge. You recognize her actions as data signals you can choose to act upon or ignore, rather than verdicts on your worth. Ambiguity ceases to trigger panic because you know that your well-being does not rest on her approval. Silence no longer feels like rejection, but an invitation for self-reflection. In this state, the most subtle forms of manipulation, glances, inflections, deliberate omissions lose their power to unsettle you. Lucidity also extends to your physical presence. Maintain posture and eye contact that convey grounded confidence rather than anxious appeal. Your body becomes a vessel of authenticity, signaling to both yourself and others that you inhabit your own center. Nietzsche's affirmation of life called for embracing one's entire existence, including flaws and chaos. Physical lucidity embraces your vulnerabilities as marks of lived experience, not signs of weakness to conceal. Ultimately, liberation through lucidity reveals that the most potent freedom is freedom from the need for freedom. You no longer chase authenticity as a goal because you radiate it through every thought, word, and gesture. In this sovereignty, you experience connection not as a concession of power, but as a mutual exchange between whole individuals. The seduction that once ensnared you now appears as an invitation to remain present with yourself. And in that presence, you find a kind of power more profound than any you've surrendered or gained a power. Born of clear sight and unwavering self-possession. In the murky aftermath of every seduction, there lies a test more profound than any battle for attention. The test of individuation. Carl Jung taught that only by integrating the shadow, the part of ourselves we banish into darkness, can we emerge whole. No longer projecting our fractures onto others, but owning them as wellsprings of strength. Today you stand at the threshold of that integration. Seductive patterns that once drained your autonomy have become signals pointing directly to the shadows you must reclaim. When you recognize that the very traits you despise, vulnerability, neediness, uncertainty, are parts of your psyche yearning for acknowledgement, you transform them from liabilities into sources of raw authenticity. Friedrich Nietzsche's call for the will to power offers a complementary spark. He urged individuals to craft their own values, to become creators rather than followers. In the realm of relationships, this means refusing the inherited moral scripts that demand you subordinate your will to someone else's performance of need. Nietzsche would say that true power is not the coercion of others, but the mastery of oneself, affirming life on your own terms, even when that life includes chaos and pain. By blending Jung's inner work with Nietzsche's radical self-authorship, you claim both the raw material of your unconscious and the fire of your conscious will to forge a new identity, one unshakable by beauty's spell or approval's lure. This alchemical process unfolds through small, deliberate acts, speaking your truth when it shakes the ground beneath you, honoring your rhythms even when they conflict with her expectations, and embracing your imperfections as badges of lived experience. Each time you choose integrity over harmony, you weave a stronger tapestry of selfhood. When anxiety about her reaction surfaces, you pause and ground yourself in your own values. When the urge to please threatens to overwhelm you, you remind yourself that the most potent magnet is your unwavering presence, not your performance. The final window of liberation comes when you see every interaction as an opportunity for mutual reflection rather than a transaction of power. In that space, ambiguity becomes a shared mystery to explore, not a lever of control. Her glance is no longer a verdict, but an invitation to deeper honesty. Her silence is no longer a trap, but a canvas for your own self-reflection. Of equals, each sovereign, each vulnerably experience intimacy not as a forfeiture of self, but as a conscious exchange between two whole beings. Remember, the seduction that once held you captive was never about her alone, but about the parts of you that sought wholeness beyond yourself. By reintegrating your shadow and authoring your own values, you render that seduction powerless. You become the embodiment of Jung's individuated self and Nietzsche's overmanan, individual who smiles at beauty without losing center, loves without surrendering autonomy, who lives the freedom born of clear sight and fierce self-possession. If this revelation struck a chord, leave a comment below sharing one truth you reclaim today, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue this journey of deep psychological liberation together.